Good afternoon and welcome back to the South Carolina Public Service Commission. We are here in docket number 2025-65E for public interviews as to storm securitization proceedings. All commissioners are present in the hearing room. Gentlemen, before we begin, have you seen what we've done so far online or heard the earlier instructions?
No, we were traveling here.
Okay, then we will repeat that. General Counsel Hill, would you please explain the proceeding as we go forward?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the special business meeting of the commission as noticed by the clerk. There is only one item on the agenda, and it relates to docket number 2025-65E, and it concerns the public interviews of those entities and persons who responded to the request for proposal. On May 22nd, 2025, the commission instructed its staff in Commission Order 2025-316 to issue a request for proposal for the selection of a qualified independent third party as required by South Carolina law. The term qualified independent third party means a person or entity with relevant expertise in accounting, finance, or utility regulation, sufficient to make the professional judgments necessary to certify compliance as required by Section 58-27-1110, subsection C, 6A, with regard to securitization. The qualified independent third party shall be designated and retained by the Commission to participate in a pre-bond issuance review process established by the Commission pursuant to South Carolina law and pursuant to the Commission's order if an order is issued. The role and responsibilities of the qualified independent third party are further detailed in Section 58-27-1110 C6. The qualified independent third party, or QTIP, will provide certification of compliance with regard to the law and with regard to the Commission's order, financing order, if issued or when issued. On June 29th, 2025, the Commission opened 5 proposals, one of which was from your company, PFM Financial Advisors, LLC. There were 4 others from Atkins Capital Strategies, LLC, Charles River Associates, Hilltop Securities, Inc., and Sabre Partners. These were in response to solicitation number 54-000-28374. Mr. Chairman, the docket is in order, and the Commission may continue conducting public interviews of representatives.
Thank you very much. Before we begin with the interview, I will remind everyone that a decision in this matter has not been made by the Commission in docket number 2025-65E, even though there was a settlement agreement presented by the parties of record. That record is, of course, closed, but a vote has not been handled yet by the Commission. Therefore, I would caution everyone from trying to obtain any indication through questioning on how the Commissioner or the Commissioner would potentially vote or discuss the possible contents of any order. As Ms. Wessinger Hill stated, the purpose of these interviews is related to the 5 responses received by the Commission. By state law, the qualified independent third party designated by the Commission must act in accordance with the statutory obligations and any additional requirements established by the Commission order. The qualified independent third party must independently participate in the pre-bond issuance review process established by the Commission pursuant to Section 58-27-1110C2J, has the authority to request and receive all necessary documents, data, and information from the electrical utility to fulfill its responsibilities and ensure compliance with 58-27-1110C6A, and has the ability to communicate directly with the parties to the docket or the proceeding as needed by the qualified independent third party to carry out its duties. The qualified independent third party cannot communicate directly or indirectly with the Commission, any commissioners, or any member of the Commission staff. This is to prevent any ex parte communication which is prohibited by South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260. The qualified independent third party designated by the commission must be able to work independently without involvement by the commission or its staff, and be able to provide independently the conclusions as directed in the financing order and applicable law. The qualified independent third party is limited and can only communicate with the commission, the docket, through the commission's docket management system with a file, letter, or document. Any other means is prohibited by law, including email, telephone calls, text, or any other manner whatsoever. Even though you cannot talk to the commissioner or staff if designated by commission as qualified independent third party, the commission and its staff also cannot talk to you except through orders or filings provided to all parties. All parties must have the opportunity to be in any meeting or conference, and all parties must have the same communications intended for one and provided at the same time. Just like the electrical utility and parties that's proceeding, that qualified independent third party makes any docket filing it believes necessary, subject to and in accordance with the Commission's procedural rules and orders. The third-party consultant may be subject to confidentiality agreements and prohibited from divulging certain sensitive information. The Commission has a process whereby confidential information can be provided and protected from public disclosure. The qualified independent third party is subject to the same process as utility and parties whereby confidential information can be provided and protected from public disclosure. The Commission may request that the qualified independent third party participate in a post-pricing meeting, which will include the electrical utility, the qualified independent third party, and all other parties to the docket. Since I have explained and outlined the manner in which the qualified independent third party can communicate with the Commission and its staff, and that is only through communication filed in docket number 2025-65E, there is no need to further address ex parte communications. Gentlemen, I welcome you today and appreciate you being here in person. We realize that being here in person is somewhat of a time-consuming matter. I would ask that we have your answers to our questions, but I would ask that you please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your presentation. Tell us about your background, anything you'd like before we begin any opening statements. These proceedings are being recorded, so it'd be helpful for you to introduce yourself when you speak. So I would ask that you speak up. Floor is yours.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to be before the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We did put some slides together, and I think we could roll through the first few. It'll give an introduction to our firm and to us as individuals, if that is okay with the chair.
All yours.
Sure. My name is Chris Lover. I'm a managing director of Public Financial Management, or PFM Financial Advisors. In terms of my background, I've been with PFM for 15 years. I've been doing governmental finance work, serving many governmental clients, primarily utilities, for that entire time. Prior to that, I was on active duty with the U.S. Army. My last 10 years in the Army, I was a budget analyst at the Pentagon, working primarily infrastructure and utilities. One of my major projects was trying to move the Marines out of Japan to Guam. I think they're still working on it, so I don't really call that a success. But still, it was just part of my background. Just prior to that, I was a teacher at West Point, and I taught economics, finance, accounting, corporate finance, among other things. So that's a bit of my background. The one other thing is my drive was about 90 minutes. I'm a new resident of the Palmetto State, and I live in Greenville, South Carolina, which is the first time I think I've said that outside of a visit to my mom. I'm going to join by two of my colleagues, John Murphy to my right. I'll ask him to introduce himself, and then we'll turn it over to Mike Mace, who's in New York right now.
Good afternoon. My name is John Murphy. I am the PFM's Director of Investor Relations. I've been at PFM for about 5.5 years. I work predominantly on the investor relations front with investors, but I also contribute into the public power team, our restructuring, debt restructuring team, and our private placement high yield issuance teams. Prior to joining PFM, I was I thought it was, oops, my bad. Shall I go again? Okay, that's fine. Sorry about that. Usually there's some technical difficulty when I'm involved, but so prior to joining PFM, I spent 20 years at Fidelity Investments, where I was a corporate bond and municipal bond trader, as well as a municipal and corporate credit analyst, also covering the securitization world for bond utilities, utility securitizations. Prior to that, I was at JP Morgan trading municipal bonds and default swaps and credit swaps and other derivatives. Prior to that, my education is I have a Master's of Science in Banking and Money Management from Adelphi University on Long Island and Baruch College in New York City is my where I did my undergrad. Happy to be here today. Mike?
Sure. Hello, my name is Michael Mace. I've been in the financial industry for over 40 years now. I spent the first 20 years of my career working at a couple of different investment banks, major Wall Street banks, working in utility finance. And since 2001, I've worked at PFM Financial Advisors exclusively in the area of governmental and not-for-profit utilities, advising them on developing and implementing financing plans. I have really dedicated my career exclusively to working with governmental and not-for-profit utilities, which is also true of the rest of us on this team. And another point is that PFM and those of us working on this transaction, none of us have ever worked for an investor-owned utility or taken compensation from an investor-owned utility, and we have never worked with investment banks in our role as financial advisors and never taken compensation from investment banks. Personally, I've worked with some of the largest governmentally owned utilities in the nation. I've worked with Santee Cooper, but I have not worked with them on any matters that have come before the Public Service Commission. Today, I'm in New York working on a bond financing for Bonneville Power Administration, a federal government power marketing agency. That transaction has some parallels to the transaction that is proposed for the securitization. It's a rather unique transaction, a taxable transaction, a maturity structure that's fairly similar to what we see in securitizations. And it's a very unique credit structure for a federal power marketing agency that requires some hand-holding and some explanation to investors, much as the securitization credits do. And so with that, I think I'll let my colleagues get started on the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Mike. So it's our goal that by the end of our discussion here today that at least we get the point across that PFM is dedicated to the governmental and non-for-profit space. We are dedicated to the utility sector. We have a dedicated team. I think there's close to 80 to 100 years of experience between us, the three of us who are sitting before you. And I think we're the right team and people to perform this function as the independent third party for the PSC. Our slide here talks about our dedication to supporting our governmental clients. Our firm wasn't born yesterday. We've been around for over 50 years, or actually 50 years. It is our anniversary year this year, and we're the #1 ranked governmental financial advisor in the U.S. We have quite a bit of experience. If you look at the lower left-hand side, you can see a rank chart from 2024, and you can see PFM is #1 compared to a lot of the other financial advisors in terms of par and transactions that are brought to market. If you look to the right-hand side with the map of the United States, you can see we're kind of all over the place, and where you don't see dots, well, we also support some of those states and those governmental and non-for-profit entities. So what that gives to the PSC is quite a bit of breadth and depth of experience and knowledge of what's going on, not only in the Southeast, but also, as Mike's doing today, the Pacific Northwest. We are a fiduciary, so we serve in your interest. And as Mike alluded to, we do not work with investor-owned utilities. And likewise, we haven't accepted any compensation. As a fiduciary to our clients and as a registered SEC and MSRB entity, we have to provide a disclosure of conflicts, which we did include in our RFP submission to the PSC. And we feel we're ready, willing, and able to work on this transaction as soon as we're given the green light. On our next slide, we have a dedicated utilities team within PFM. So PFM has over 300 employees. And you can see all the folks who are listed here are dedicated to the utility sector. So we have quite a handful of folks with quite a few different expertise and specialties amongst them. And when you go to our next slide, we've taken some of the more senior folks for this team here, myself, Mike Mace, and John Murphy. There you can see some of our educational experience and some of our certifications. We are registered advisors with the SEC and MSRB, so Series 50 and Series 54. And a couple other interesting notes there, as you could see the breadth of clients we work with. For example, the first one for me, PGW, Philadelphia Gas. I'm supporting them on a rate case with the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission as we speak. And then for Mike and John, they've worked on the utility securitizations with Long Island Power Authority, kind of doing business with their special purpose entity, utility debt securitization agency. And John's also worked with North Carolina on their securitizations as well as Indiana. So we have had, again, a firm dedicated to the non-governmental and non-for-profit space, a dedicated utility team, and within that utility team, some of the most senior folks on it. And our next slide. We also have, just up the road in Charlotte, a pricing group. So what our pricing group does is they work with all of our clients, our client base, not just utilities, and they help determine how those bonds should price in the marketplace. What is the spread to the AAA benchmark, and why is it at the case? Why is it that spread versus any other spread? So they've developed some very sophisticated modeling. They could price all sorts of debt, and what that helps do is figure out a very sound structure which appeals not only to the economics of the lowest cost of debt, but also to the investor preferences. If you look on the lower right-hand side, we've compared ourselves in this case to the largest Wall Street investment banks. And as you can see, we price more transactions in the marketplace than even, say, a Bank of America or a JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. So we're very active in the marketplace. On average, I think we're doing about 10 to 15 transactions a week. And that really provides you one great asset, which is asymmetric information and the ability to understand every single transaction, what different structures means to different groups of investors, and how those bonds should price. Again, given that information, we can drive those spreads to the benchmark as low as possible, which directly translates to a debt service cost.
And hopefully all this experience gives you the comfort that knowing that you have folks that are dedicated to what we're doing, but also understanding each one of the markets and how we're going to be driving things for the ratepayers of South Carolina.
Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Williams.
Thank you, sir. Gentlemen, I have a quick question for you based on this portion of your presentation. So I see that you do not underwrite bonds.
Correct.
Right. And just, I want to get a feel for what gives you the confidence to know that you're going to get the pricing right compared to maybe some of your competitors who may have experience underwriting bonds and have experience with potential buyers, if you will, to ensure that the underwriters are doing their due diligence to get the best deal, anecdotally, if you will, deal for the ratepayer.
Okay, I'll take the first part of the question, and maybe I'll turn it over to John and Mike for any other thing they would like to add. I think by not holding a position, that means we are free from conflicts. And we represent your interest, the interests of the ratepayers here in South Carolina. If I'm a bank and I am going to underwrite part of a transaction because there's a lack of demand, that means I typically have to have a higher yield on those bonds in order to bring those into the inventory of the bank and then work them off over time. So that higher yield translates to higher debt costs. Okay, so since we don't have that conflict, we can say this is a fair yield given these market conditions. So we think by not holding inventory, it makes us more of a fiduciary to entities such as yourself, the Public Service Commission.
And from our pricing side, when I look at the amount of deals that we're pricing every day and in the market all the time, that's a bevy of information that we get to use to help when we're making the decisions whether this should be 2 or 3 tighter based on where recent deals have come in the marketplace. So you having good comps for it is key. So underwriters are going to come out when they bring a book and it's going to say, here are the 3 or 4 comps that we're going to push this, market this deal with. We already know that. We already have the basis and knowledge of where this thing should trade and what it should comp to. So understanding your deal, understanding where deals are pricing around you is what our pricing group does. We are talking with the underwriters and in the process, and Mike is doing this right now, of making sure that when this comes to market, we know what the spreads are. We're not dictating them. We're letting the underwriters call their market, but we're holding their feet to the fire if we know more than they do on current market conditions. And that's been the case a lot in the recent market, and at least in the municipal market from that standpoint. The other part of it is knowing the investors in the space. And as head of investor relations, we have for all our clients that we work with, we have the buyer base of who's involved in those deals. So understanding who's showing up, who's downloading the materials, who's actively involved and engaged from prior deals that are similar deals and comp deals, then we can make sure that that group of buyers is going to be showing up to our deal, to the South Carolina deal.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other questions at this time? You want to proceed? Go ahead.
Just
Commissioner Cass.
Thank you. PFM, you guys understand that I guess what you will be doing will be alongside the evidence of other parties and entities. You're not advising us. You're going to be providing information along those lines. Is that your clear understanding?
Correct.
And without divulging any confidential information, the financing order will be coming out pretty soon. So that wouldn't be your role or any of that information. Is that
Correct.
Understood or clear?
Yep. And our capacity in the past, that is how we've acted. Once after the financing order has been delivered, that's when we've been engaged with both the North Carolina Commission and also the Indiana Commission as well. But the difference in those 2 cases, we did advise the commission themselves on the process and setting up processes throughout the whole transaction in the market period that we did have contact with them. This would be a different case in the sense that outside of the putting it through the document management system, there would be no. And just knowing that you have to trust us and have faith in us and our fiduciary duty to make sure that we're doing our job is what we're here for.
I understand. This has nothing to do with any of this stuff, but you drive up I-85 every day to Charlotte from Greenville?
No. I work from home essentially, so I'm using the GSP airport.
Okay, I was going to say, you're a better man than me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston.
Okay, so we do have a few more slides that we can quickly roll through, and this is really kind of a case study of how we've done securitization transactions for other entities throughout the U.S. So this is Long Island Power Authority, and I'll turn this over to Mike Mace to talk through this one.
Sure. We serve as the financial advisor to Long Island Power Authority and also to the special purpose entity created by state legislation, their Utility Debt Securitization Authority. We've worked with Long Island Power Authority since 2008. In 2011, there was Superstorm Sandy, which caused a couple of $2 billion worth of damage to the Long Island Power Authority system and also damage to their credit rating and credit standing. So the state passed legislation to provide them with the ability to sell, at that point, roughly $4 billion of securitization debt, which they have since increased to $8 billion. I think, and they have now sold $6.3 billion in several separate financings, and we're working on another transaction that will be brought this year. I think the unique part about this Long Island Power Authority is that we serve as financial advisor to basically all the parties involved in the transaction. And I think if you ever saw that in the context of an investor-owned utility transaction, you would feel, and probably rightly so, that there were some conflicts inherent in that situation. But since the Long Island Power Authority is a not-for-profit entity that serves all the customers on Long Island, that really their duty is first and foremost to the ratepayer and everybody involved in the transaction, the management of the utility itself, the board of the authority, and the Utility Debt Securitization Authority and its board all have one singular goal, which is to produce the best possible outcome and lowest rates for their consumers. There is no conflicting interest in this case, for example, between the consumer, the customer, and the shareholder. There are no shareholders of LIPA. So that's a unique transaction where we're fully involved in every aspect of the transaction, in the selection of bankers, in the marketing, in the credit rating process, in the transaction execution, and in squeezing, as we call it, that last basis point or last fraction of a percent of an interest rate out of that transaction to make it the best possible transaction for the utility customers. And part of the certification of financial advisors or qualified independent third parties for the utility debt transactions is to be able to certify that, subject and under the current market conditions, you've gotten the best possible deal for the customer. And that's pretty much what PFM does in every single government or not-for-profit utility transaction. It's just that we don't have to do a formal certification. We have probably less formal certifications and opinions that we deliver with most of those other transactions, but still the goal in everything we do, the lowest possible cost outcome for the consumer.
And I'll take this. I was the lead on our advising of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission on their securitization with CGCO. And this was a process where we were brought in. I was advising or co-advising the Indiana Finance Authority on their energy 21st Century Energy Commission with the legislature, and having conversations with them. And then when their financing order came through, a bond team was put together, and through a memorandum of understanding, we were taken. Our relationship with the IFA was moved over and we were part of the bond team an advisor on the bond team for the commission and working with staff. That was a unique transaction in the sense it was the first one in Indiana, and making sure that the commission understood, the commissioners understood, but the staff understood and was able to relay this was part of what we did on the process. And, you know, Mike talked about LIPA setting up and being part and parcel of that whole thing on the advisory side. For the RURC, this was a new space, this was a new relationship, so we wanted to make sure that we established a procedure of going through to what they can expect at each step of the way, and then having conversations before and after each one of the bond team meetings to make sure that everyone understood what was communicated in the meetings, and if they had any concerns, that we can voice their concerns or they can voice their concerns at the next meeting to make sure that the process went as smoothly as possible. And documented throughout the whole period of time, we had our reports to the bond team, to the commission and the staff. So there was no hiding of anything that were to happen where, you know, the financing order comes and then you go to market. It was fully explored and developed and reported throughout that process. It ended up in savings for the ratepayers, and that was proven. And we were matching our models. We're matching with what the underwriters were providing us and the bankers were providing us. So knowing that whatever models they had, we were comparing and actually making suggestions that if there are certain things in the model that could be better, we did. But, you know, knowing that we have that ability, we have those capabilities in our quant group and our structuring teams to make sure that, you know, whatever's happening on the underwriting and banking side, that we're verifying all those numbers to make sure that they lead to the savings that are represented the company and by the underwriters.
And our next case study talks about North Carolina. And John, you want to take that first and then hand it over to Mike?
Sure. This was another case as well where, as I mentioned, we were brought in after the financing order was issued. We were brought into the team. We had direct contact with the commissioners in setting up the bond team, representing and having conversations, just like in Indiana, before and after. And any questions that were to come through, we were able to have open lines of communication with the commissioners in that forum. Mike, do you want to take the rest?
Sure, John. I think in the North Carolina case, it was their initial securitization. The responsibilities and the output of the process, the certification, seemed to be very similar to what would be required for South Carolina. As John pointed out, it would be some pretty different ground rules in terms of the communication and the process. In your case, communicating exclusively through the docket. We don't anticipate that being a problem. We think that the work to be done, the scope to be done, is quite similar to what we did in North Carolina, and I think quite successfully there.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Wilson.
gentlemen, how are you today? Thank you for being here. I just have a question about the North Carolina letter. I see that it looks like it's goes for more than one page. Would this be considered a qualified opinion letter?
It was a, Mike, you want to take that? I'm thinking about it from an accounting standpoint, qualified versus unqualified opinion.
No, I don't think it would be considered a qualified opinion. That's one of the things when we have delivered our opinions and certifications in these things, we've never requested they be kept confidential. We're always very clear in the opinion that's been given. We'd certainly be happy to provide a full version of that opinion.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And ma'am, likewise on the previous slide, we have the other opinion for the Indiana case, if you'd like to see that
Yeah,
too.
that was the full bond report that we submitted with the staff.
We just put a screenshot of it so you could tell.
Yep,
The full letter was in the initial submittal from Indiana.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
We have a couple more slides here where there are some of the technical questions, I'll call it, and what we've done is we've attempted to answer these. These are also, I think we have 6 of these slides here that go through and ask some of the, answer some of the questions pretty directly that were sent to PFM last week. I don't know if it's helpful to go line by line through these, but we can if you'd like. I think on question number 2 here, the work that we've done with North Carolina, the work we've done with Indiana, kind of illustrate that we can provide this type of an opinion. We know what's expected, what's comprised in it, and we can deliver it.
And I think to one of the questions that I think that Duke had submitted on this is that the certification or the deeming of securitization bonds to be asset-backed securities and ABS. That's an interesting one from a standpoint of the market has been, as it's developed over the last 15, 20 years, is it's been both corporate and both ABS, and how you apply to the SEC for your registration would determine who the buyers are going to be and what your buyer base is going to be. Having these being determined as ABS, I don't think hurts in the marketing of the bonds, and we can talk to the underwriters and they can speak to this, but also the size of that market is large enough that any type of utility securitization and being that's such a small part of the overall market that there'll be plenty of demand for this type of paper for utility securitizations. There has been in the past, and it is a nice diversifier in the ABS space as opposed to just auto loans, credit cards, and floor plan stuff.
I think in terms of the numbers of transactions we've done, if you just look over the time period requested, I think we're down to 5 transactions. Some of the earlier LIPA transactions don't fall in there. Likewise, when you look at PFM as a whole, we've done securitizations for tobacco, and those started in the 90s. So when you think about it from that standpoint, we've been in the securitization business for close to 30 years with kind of a shift into the utility space most recently. For the certification, we feel we can provide this certification. I think, as Mike alluded to, we typically find opinions and fairness memos on a fairly routine basis for virtually every transaction we do back to our governmental clients. So we don't feel we'd have any cause for concern in this circumstance.
Yeah, this opinion is actually formed over the whole period of the pricing, so it's not just that one day and then you're rushing to put it all together. This is the work of the whole time period of the marketing and the pricing of the debt. So it's the culmination of such, and within 1 day business days is not an issue.
And then there were some questions from Duke here that I thought we put in here. I don't know if folks would like to hear it, but in general, we don't foresee any issues. Again, John discussed the idea of ABS securities and what the implications are in terms of buyer base. One of their other questions was confidentiality, abiding by the confidentiality. Again, we're a fiduciary to all of our clients, and we're very frequently familiar with this type of relationship and what it means to have that type of confidentiality agreement in place. This is, again, just the 5 years of the securitization information. So it's we're down to 5 transactions across UDSA as well as North Carolina and Indiana. I think their last question, have we ever declined to provide a certification? And the answer is no. We've met all the requirements in terms of information and timeliness.
And one would think to that question too is you make sure that through that whole process, if there's any objections, you're objecting to it. So at the end, you come out with the right solution and the lowest cost solution for the ratepayers, and making sure you handle those discrepancies, or if you have any concerns through the process, and making sure it's known then. It's what we're involved with.
All right. Any further, Commissioner Bells?
Thank you. Gentlemen, I just want to point something out. You've made part of your presentation. You've indicated that you've never been paid by investor-owned utility for the work you provide. That you stick to the nonprofit and governmental area. If whoever the QITP, I always have to think about the order there, is, they end up being paid by Duke. That's the cost for the commission's consultant is rolled into the finance, or the cost of the bonds and the financing cost. Is that going to present a problem?
No, that is not a problem. I think when we talk about not being paid by investor-owned utilities or deriving compensation, it's just they are not selecting us. It's not coming out of their shareholder dollars.
They're not your client. Is that what is
Right.
that the main thing?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I know that's a little quirk. I don't know how these are done in other states. I know that's how it is here. And I just, you seem to be in a niche area, and you're proud of that, and I can understand that. I just want you to be aware of that.
In the Indiana case, we were paid from the IURC budget, not from the sale and the commission, from the process.
I just want you to be aware of
No,
that.
understood.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Belcher. Any further commissioner questions? Hearing none, gentlemen, thank you. Commissioner
Thank you.
Williams.
I'm slow on the draw. A basic fundamental part of this work is the statute requires that we be confident that this is the lowest possible cost to the customer. You've talked about pieces and parts of it, but could you answer how you will invoke that confidence to us?
Sure. I'll start. Again, this is Chris Lover. When we talk about costs, I think for the one thing that comes to mind primarily is how did the bonds price in terms of a spread to the benchmark. And we, again, have a pricing group dedicated to pricing bonds, taxable and tax exempt, for our entire client base. So that informational database that they have in real time helps us say, this is how these bonds should price. And this is what we feel the spread to that benchmark is. And that is directly impacting your total debt service costs, which directly impacts the ratepayers. So that's one thing. I would say when you think about the ancillary services and the costs that are embedded in the transaction, we have some knowledge, with all the other transactions we do of what's a fair, call it a takedown for a bond transaction. We know kind of lawyer fees and things like that. So some other costs that might be associated with getting these bonds to market. So we could provide, I'll call it a sniff test to some of those. But I think the big aspect of it is how do the bonds price in the market on that day, and what was the yields and that spread to the benchmark on that. And John, I don't know if you have anything to add, but.
Yeah, John Murphy. The one thing I would add to that is being involved in the processing and on the bond team and being part of the underwriting and picking of the underwriters and who your team is to making sure that they are the best team for this particular transaction, whether it be, one of the larger ones or some smaller firm with a niche that can prove that they have the capability to do these things. That is also what we bring to bear, to making sure that they're financially sound, but what they bring to the table is going to help the transaction and be the best underwriter for the process for your deal.
Mike, anything to add?
I'll briefly say, the question would be, does PFM know securitization? I think the answer to that is yes. We've worked on major securitization programs for some very high-profile issuers. Do we know the bond markets? Our group within PFM, I think last year it was almost 90 billion of debt that we worked on, where we're going through a similar process as to what we would be doing here, is to making sure we have the right people, making sure we're conducting the process in the right way, investigating every bit of potential investor demand out there and marketing it properly. And then once you've done that and you have an order book and you have investors in the book, is to really trying to squeeze that last basis point out of that investor order book or out of the potential demand that you have. And I think when we work with underwriters and do this process, there's a lot of times that we're in that negotiating process and we'll hear, well, it's just a basis point. It's just the difference between 6% and 6.01. I think when we hear that, we say, well, if it's just a basis point and they're being thrown about freely, well, we'll take as many of them as an underwriter will give us or as an investor will give us. So I think we are skilled, experienced in the major aspects of this project, and it is just part of the fabric of what PFM does, why the firm was created, and what we do every day to get the best possible transaction for the benefit of our clients and their constituents.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate the answers.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Any further commissioner questions? Hearing none, thank you, gentlemen, for being here, both virtually and in person. We have, of course, copies of what you presented. You've made a good presentation. We hope to be moving on this in the next couple of weeks on all our decisions involving this, and look forward to reviewing what you've submitted, and hope you have safe travels.
Thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We're in recess until 3 o'clock. Carolina Public Service Commission. We are here today conducting interviews as to securitization as requested by the Duke Energy Carolinas Company. Gentlemen, I noticed earlier when we went through the opening statements that you were both present in
Yes,
the
I think
room.
you can waive that.
Would you like to hear them again, or are you satisfied to go forward? and
We're satisfied to
understand?
go forward. No,
All right.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to you then.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and a pleasure to be back in front of you to be able to present our credentials specifically related to the qualified independent third party as amended by recent legislation. Because this is a transparent and full process, I'm going to go over some things about my firm and everything that you already probably know, but since this is another process, we were going to repeat some things. And I'm not doing it to bore you, but to make sure the record is fully and complete, and there is a new commissioner as well. Sabre Partners was founded 25 years ago by former utility, legal, banking, and capital markets executives that had worked together. This is our 25th anniversary. We're an independent private firm that really takes interest, take assignments in the public interest. And we specialize in the power industry and regulation because that's basically where our background has been for the 30 or 40 years we've all been working. We're not a broker-dealer or underwriter, and that's very important. And I think you've heard it from different sides, sometimes that it is important and other times that it isn't important. But we think it is important that we do not have any conflicts of interest. We have no sales, trading, swaps with Duke bonds or any other securities. We don't participate in underwriting syndicates, again. And we're not involved with investors who may purchase the bonds. Some people may think it's important to be involved with investors, but then you have to understand the dynamics of a firm, compensation, income, and other things that have all effects. And we have been a thought leader on utility securitizations. What I mean by that is we actually pioneered the use of certifications 25 years ago in Texas. So we're intimately familiar for decades with SEC-registered corporate and utility bonds. We know that you've heard a lot of talk about the municipal bond market, or people will say government-sponsored or something. It's a very different market than the corporate and investor-owned utility market. EEI and the American Public Power Association don't work together a lot because there's different interests and such, and the investors are often very different. Sometimes there's overlap when they sell taxable debt, but not the majority of those are tax-exempt debt. So SEC-registered corporate bonds is where we come from. Now, we bring what we think are the right people to evaluate and provide you the information and comfort for you to make the decision. We have, and I believe he's on the phone, Brian Marr, who's a former Exxon Assistant Treasurer for Capital Markets and External Finance. Hyman Schoenblum, who's a former Treasurer of Consolidated Edison in New York. Paul Southern, who was an Assistant Treasurer in Florida. Barry Abramson, an equity analyst. Steve Heller, a financial analyst and structurer from investment banks of these types of deals. Becky Klein, who is a former chair of the Texas Commission, actually when certifications first were being used. But I also want to highlight two additions that have come to Sabre since our last assignment with you. One is Ed Fitzgerald. Ed Fitzgerald and I have worked together and known each other for about 35, 40 years. The last 30 years, he's been working he was the head of the structured investments for New York Life, one of the largest investors in the marketplace, life insurance companies. He's joined us and has this particular insight in terms of the investor base and contacts and buyer base. And to my left is John Robert Bob Hinton. He's the former economist from the North Carolina Utility Commission public staff, who was actually a member of the Duke Bond Advisory Team on 2021 on the North Carolina transaction, and can give you his personal views and perspectives on that. And that which we all think bolsters ours. Our methodology and expertise is documented, fully transparent through the multiple publications that we've come out. There's no secret sauce in terms of exactly how our approach is. We go into great detail. We've published for NARUC at the National Regulatory Research Institute. We just published in Nature Energy a peer-reviewed analysis of pricing and use of these types of bonds. And we have other publications in terms of our methodology, discount rates, and how to determine success in the capital markets. So it's there. It's just not an oral presentation. It's not a flip book. You see it, and it's documented. We're very proud of what we're right now. Our current assignment is that we are representing and advising 8 governors: Colorado, New Mexico, North Carolina, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, and California, in addition to the NARUC and NSUCA, who have passed resolutions in support of these 8 governors in their interaction with the SEC on this very important issue of the classification of the bonds and what that does to affordability and electricity rates. We have very detailed information. There's some things in the back. I don't think we're going to get that to today, but that's something that may come up and we may need to brief you on through. We understand Governor McMaster was interested in potentially signing on to this letter. A member from ORS, I think Mr. Edmond, spoke with the governor's office in Colorado on some things, but decided to wait and see how the governor's this dialogue comes out. It's at a very critical stage, and we will be able to update you through the document management system. And our approach, we think, is very straightforward, and it's aligned with what we think a qualified independent third party should do, and it's this. Oh, but there's no sound. Is there a way to put the sound on? Well, now, I just want to say, it's just... Isn't it the sound? It's up. Yes, sir. Oh, my name is Joseph Fischera. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Sabre Partners, LLC, since 2000. Did we solve the issue? We had it last time. Yeah, I think you're going to get it now.
Trust, but verify. It's still play, but cut the cards. It's still watch closely, and don't be afraid to see what you see.
And I think that's our philosophy too. Trust but verify. Cut the cards first and be open and honest and see what you see. And the 3 key phases in the legislation here, I think, are important in terms of where we go forward. First phase is obviously the financing order process. You haven't issued the financing order, and in our RFP, there was a duty to inquire, and we provided a number of questions which we think should be addressed potentially in the financing order. And we're happy to have any of the materials that we filed with you to be made public and provided. Nothing that we provided you, we mark confidential or confidential and cannot be released. In fact, we would like the information and analysis of opinions and certifications to be released because I think that's an important discussion point. The legislation says that the qualified independent third party is to provide information to for you to make a decision as to whether it has achieved the lowest charges, not just the interest rate on the bond, it's the charges. So that's all the other costs associated with the transaction as well that go into those charges, which is a distinction. And we also saw that, phase two is then the pre-issuance process, structuring, marketing, and pricing. As we look at the current financing order, Duke has proposed that you approve various things on estimates and giving them a great deal of flexibility then to make all of the final decisions subject then to this review process. Well, you can do that. You could delegate all the authority to them, but you may want to make adjustments if there are material issues that come up during the process that would affect the charges. Not just little things, but if it's something material, like the ABS corporate issue and a discussion with the SEC or something that Neighborhood has done, or something that has happened in the market, then we should be able to bring that to you in the document management system, have a discussion, people can brief. We can also follow the confidentiality rules if there is issues related to that. And then finally is the issuance advice letter. And that, there's some ambiguity in what we've seen in the proposals of whether the QITP is simply an observer throughout the process, but can't really has the ability to talk to the parties, but we don't know whether Duke will say that that means he can't talk to market participants. And whether you're just supposed to be like a data request, just reviewing numbers are in a letter. So what numbers in that letter might be important, and we have ideas about a more detailed issuance advice letter process that will give us more dynamic information. Many of the issuance advice letters are simply pro forma, lots of schedules about rates and everything, but nothing that gets to that issue of the lowest charges. So we just see for each phase defined in the role, what's our duty? Will people accept the fiduciary duty and professional standards? Because those will affect the effort and the cost. We gave you in our work plan, attachment A, a very detailed memorandum with a lot of exhibits. But that was an example of the thoroughness of our work and our willingness to document, not just shoot from the hip at meetings like this and say this and that, but put it in writing, see it, people can ask questions, go back and forth, make a decision. Effort will affect the quality of the certification. The quality of the certification will affect the comfort that you will have that it may be done. We put an analogy there about, buying $1 million house and, the seller tells you, I've got an inspection that says the house is great shape. It's the best price you could ever get. Go buy it. And should you just accept that, assume that that inspection report is correct? Or do you hire your own inspector? And then if you hire your own inspector, does that inspector say, are you calling me a liar? Or, you can see the pictures from the house and you say, well, I'd like to get in and actually look at the house. Well, no, that'll take too much time. Well, there is a process in terms of what you're going to do, your due diligence. You can assume that they did this and that. You can assume that the pictures of that. And then you could say, what we think is a qualification, if you ever see, as you see in the analysis, when you say something without independent investigation. When you see without independent investigation, that means I didn't look. I didn't do my own work. But if you look at the statute, it talks about independently participating in the pre-issuance process. It talks about providing additional information. So we think it's better, but you can say other commissions were comfortable with that pro forma piece of paper. You could do that. It'll be lower cost. But if you want a higher degree of certainty, you're going to have the Professional Standards Association with fairness opinions and other things. We have actually done 13 of these. We're sort of like the New York Yankees of certifications. We've done them since 2001, and the dockets that we have done we'll go through have had all sorts of different cases associated, but they basically can provide a report to you and give you confidence. And what I want to show now is that in the last certification we did for the Florida Public Service Commission, with the full support of the commission and adherence to best practices, we think the following can be the same for South Carolina.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for joining us here today. This meeting is called to order for the petition for issuance of the Nuclear Asset Recovery Financing Order by Duke Energy.
So this was a very successful effort. A lot of people were involved, and we would have not had this result without the tireless efforts of our financial consultants, Sabre Partners, and Joe Fischera in particular. On the first slide, we talk about the total financing cost of 2.72%. This is the lowest cost in the history of investor-owned utility rate reduction bonds. The investors that bought these bonds, did so at interest rates that were in line with U.S. agency securities such as Tennessee Valley Authority, Fannie Mae, Federal Home Loan Board, and some of the largest, highest rated global corporations such as Johnson & Johnson and Exxon. The next slide, we wanted to highlight the 18-year maturity specifically because when you look at this, this is a comparison of how the DEF project finance bonds priced relative to comparable issues of these other names I mentioned, priced right on top of Tennessee Valley Authority. Tennessee Valley Authority sells billions of debt that are well-known issuer. DEF project finance didn't exist more than 6 months ago. So this was almost akin to an initial public offering. We were able to do so with the collaborative effort of Duke Energy Florida, Sabre Partners staff, and the other outside councils that came together to make this successful. But this is a strong signal that those efforts were successful.
This fantastic outcome is no accident. As you pointed out, it is the culmination of months of hard work.
We owe a special thanks to your staff on the bond team led by Andrew Mallory and including Mark Cicchetti and Roseanne Gervasi. They were vigorous and very knowledgeable advocates for the customer's interests and obviously had the full support of the executive director and the general counsel in their advocacy, and we deeply appreciate it. But the OPC saved its best thanks for the Commission's advisor, Sabre Partners, and especially Joe Fischera, and the Commission's bond counsel, Dean Criddle, who brought impressive expertise, experience, and discipline to the transaction, and without question were instrumental in saving many millions of dollars for the customers in current and future costs. Through their dogged and expert advocacy to achieve the optimum and lowest cost for customers at the outset.
We support Duke's issuance advice letter. We support Sabre's opinion letter. We are profoundly grateful for the $684 million of additional savings over and above what you already approved in the 2013 global settlement. And I'm profoundly impressed. The Federation is profoundly impressed with and by all the work that went into this, and even more so by the result. This is just really, really great. I'm going to put it into 3 words: wow and thank you.
That's great.
But I also would like to acknowledge the foresight of those who worked on the legislation in providing the resources and the direction for the Commission to be able to hire outside bond counsel and outside financial advisor. I do believe that was a very important part of process and an important part of the success of the results, working closely, of course, with our staff and all of the involved parties. This is truly a good news story, and I hope that that good news gets out that although it is a complex financial transaction, it is an innovative financing mechanism to address a very unique situation. And I do believe that the result that we have before us is consistent with the statutory objectives, that the lowest charges consistent with the prevailing market conditions have been achieved, and that we were also able to achieve the greatest possible consumer protections. Lots of these.
And we get positive results. Positive results. So seeing that we do not need to have a motion, and we don't need any further discussion. If no one has any further discussion, a big thank you again in closing, and this meeting is adjourned.
So the reason we ask you to believe us is that we've done it, and we've done it before. And in fact, Texas had in 2000, 25 years ago, going back, had a similar statute talking about providing a net benefits qualified and then structuring and pricing. Didn't have the word marketing, but structuring and pricing with the lowest transition charges consistent with market conditions in the financing order. And here, the former chairman and commissioners who were at that time talked about our abilities and support of providing this, because they were the ones to initiate asking us as advisors to provide a certification. It was uncharted territory at that time. And how to do that and how to go forward was very difficult. But what it did, in the information that was provided, you can see that over the course of the pricings that we did versus the other pricings in the market were substantially below. Not all of them were, but as you can see, that the trend line and in terms of the maturities and such, they saved money and they consistently beat others in the market. When you're negotiating with folks, people are going to be talking to you about, well, look at those other transactions. We would always say, well, that's nice information, but that's yesterday's transaction. We're talking about today's transaction. And that's how we would drive tighter spreads in the negotiation. Some of, for the record, our other clients in Florida, West Virginia talked about our abilities to develop a plan, reduce the overall cost and interest rate. In North Carolina, Chris Ayers, where we work, believes that we are better advisors to commissions than we are to interveners, which I do agree with him. In which that's where but we've worked on both sides. So where we say to you, we wanted to point out some of the key issues. One, will the contract say that we are a fiduciary and that we have to act in your best interest? That's important. Some people will or not do it, have that role. What's the form? One of the things, as you will see in our work plan, you do fairness opinions or you do other, you're not supposed to rely on information from a source that's conflicted, who has a financial interest in things. Law firms cannot rely upon other firms that have interest. They have to do independent due diligence. But all that could be, in a way, if your contract or your form of certification says that's allowed, then if that's what you're accepting, that's what you're accepting. But we think that's something you should be knowingly going into the process. What are the standards? Fairness opinions, there's a lot of court cases and everything in Delaware about when a board of directors who has a fiduciary duty to their shareholders is involved in a financial transaction, they need to get an opinion about what they're about to do. That opinion has certain standards of due diligence associated with that. Are they incorporated here, or are we looking not to that? That's an open question. Are we at the negotiating table, or are we outside the room waiting for them to come to the results and say, guess what, it was the best deal that we could get, here's the numbers. And it's not a quantity. The legislation talks about the QITP making judgments. So that's making opinions. It's not just looking at data. And we know this is important because we looked at a contract in Missouri where the contractor is going to submit a same thing, whether the structure and marketing and pricing result in the lowest charge consistent with market conditions. However, it inserted a proviso, provided that that letter would not constitute and should not be construed a fairness opinion as that term is used in court. Well, why would you put that in there? Is that a benefit to the ratepayer, or is that a benefit to the certifier? It's a benefit to the certifier. Reliance. The contractor can rely on any certificate from any third party without independent investigation or notification. Now think about that. If you're allowed to provide a certificate, if the underwriters have to provide a certificate and the utility provides a certificate, and your contract says you may rely on that without independent investigation, you get into a circular motion. You're now relying on other people's certificates by contract without any responsibility. So, devil in the details. There's a whole body, the 40-page memorandum we sent to you. We'd love to have it made public and part of the record and let people comment on it. The challenges for a South Carolina paper is in 2023, when you've heard this ABS, the bankers were saying these are cheap AAA bonds. They published this, 40 basis points wide, the AA. That's 40 basis points. That's a lot of ratepayer money on the table. It's not just a couple of basis points. And you say, well, that was a year, the market's efficient, people go. Well, here is an article that appeared on March 15th, 2025. The headline is Buy-Siders Finding Yield in Utilities. I'm quoting. And by the way, I don't even subscribe to this. They don't work for me. I'm reporting to you about the market. They say utility fee bonds are producing outsized yields for investors. They're hungry for 15 to 20 years, paper like here, seeking fatter returns, but still getting AAA rates. Buy-side base for such securities extremely concentrated. And then there's a reference to the governor's efforts. So you've heard information that there's plenty of investors that buy these bonds. Absolutely. But they're getting outsized yields. They're not saying, and there's also discussion in here in this article, I think, that a recent transaction was done for Clico in Louisiana that was priced like a single A subprime auto bond. Just got to think about that. Remember the financial crisis? And subprime means the worst creditors. An auto bond, which is a car, which is not an electric bill, which is not, and you're pricing similar to a single A subprime auto bond in the asset market, something's wrong. We think so, and we think it'd be, and I often heard people about, it's the market. That's the market. The market is this, market's that. But you can, and my colleagues will join it, you can influence the market. And you can see here in this, if I can do a pointer, to the far left, you'll see was Barclays in the Duke transaction we showed. That green line is AAA corporate bonds. And when we achieved, and these are looking at all of the credit spreads associated with every deal done from 2016 to 2025 that had 20-year maturities, which is similar to the bonds that is being proposed here. And you can see the red line are what are known as triple B securities. They're weaker credits. And then so we see in 2016, we're right near and on top of that AAA line. And then by 2020, we're Southern California, they're there too. And then it starts to drift away. And it's almost like those charts where you see somebody might know that something's going on, because all of a sudden, out of the blue, Bloomberg reclassified the securities from corporate to ABS with no substantive reason other than some of their investors complained. A class action lawsuit was then filed against them about a year or 2 years later. And then the SEC came out with a statement that was more confusing. But you can see that the spreads became more associated with triple B, weaker credits, than AAA. Now, why is that? Is the market just a market? Everything's efficient? Well, this is not, these bonds are not traded in an exchange. There's no full transparency associated with them. And one of the reasons that you have a qualified independent third party is to try to pull back that cloak of them saying, yeah, this is what my investor told me. This is it. These are the only people and such, and bring more competition to the process. So we think that Saber Partners, as the RFP says, is the best value, most advantageous for the South Carolina Public Service Commission to hire. And we're grateful for the comments of our previous clients that support that with that. And we, rather than there's other slides going into some more granular stuff. If you want to get to that, we can do that. But I've spoken a lot and open up for your questions or my colleagues' perspectives.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Any commissioner questions? None? Commissioner Williams.
I'm searching for your name, because as long as you're sitting there.
Bob Hinton.
Bob, yes.
Hinton,
Yes, ma'am.
would you like to add anything from your perspective?
Yes, I've been in the staff for almost 40 years, and so I've seen a lot and testified before the North Carolina Utilities Commission well over 30 times for a host of finance and investment and planning and electric utility industry and a host of things. Mr. Fisher and the Sabre team testified and helped the commission with a solid financing order to start the process. Now we had to implement, issue the bond, do the structuring, marketing, pricing. A director came to me and asked me, well, I know you weren't intrinsically involved in his testimony, but would you take over now? My heart sunk. I was asked to do something I wasn't really prepared to do. I took that role and I tried to do the best I could as consumer advocates. That's what the public staff is, as your ORS is the same. And but I didn't have the background, and it became so evident that I didn't have the background that the Sabre team offered. And I wished I could have pulled them out of my pocket on numerous times when I was a member of the BAT team. I can't go into the details of the BAT conversation because obviously they're confidential, but I can say this. You can look at my letter. It's not a certification letter because I wouldn't let my lawyer call it that. It's called a letter of, I'll say, support. I filed it on November 18th, 2021 for the public staff. I was the face. I wrote that letter. I used the words, the public staff believes that the process will likely result in the lowest storm recovery charges. Now, trust me, I struggled with that sentence. I struggled with will likely. I mean, I could have said probably, but I said will likely. I did not clarify what will likely really meant. I said will likely. The point was, I was always in the BAT team feeling inadequate. Now, you all have made decisions over the past years of the commission, just like North Carolina, just as I would testify and make recommendations. There's a level of confidence. That's a word we've used a lot today. You need a high level of confidence to ensure the consumer is well served. I came to the conclusion, and in my association with Sabre Partners ever since, that they are the team you want on your side, bar none. They have no conflicts. I think that's an important thing that Joe has talked about. And I think the essence of their knowledge. I mean, these people of the Treasury, and when I was first with the staff, one of these men I used to read about in Merrill Lynch Bond Roundup. And I go, wow. And as a young analyst, when I was only 25 at that time, I was amazed at their knowledge of the bond market. Because you know, the bond market is different than equities. We can all be an equity analyst, but we can't be a bond analyst overnight. But they had that knowledge, and they bring that to the table today. So I want to urge you, for that level of confidence that I lacked, I urge you to hire this team as your advisor.
I know if you'd like to talk to our other people on the bench, you know, Brian Marr from Exxon in terms of.
Yeah, I could say, if this is Brian, can you hear me? I could say a few words. I've been retired from Exxon for quite a few years now. I spent 35 years in finance and done billions of dollars of financings and complex financial transactions. And the reason I decided to sign on as a financial advisor for some of these transactions with Joe is because he did some really good work for Exxon, even when he was a banker. You know, he was willing to stand up to his bosses who just wanted to get a deal done and say, no, wait, the client doesn't really want that, doesn't need that. And you don't always get that from bankers. So he has a level of integrity that you wouldn't normally have found in the banking institutions. And that's why he doesn't do it anymore. So I think that the key thing, though, is that he's a tireless worker. And I mean, you can hardly believe how much he cares about the ratepayer. I mean, we've been hearing this for 20 years now, and it's absolutely true. He's as interested in the ratepayer as the commission is, and that's quite a bit. And you know, and look at the other parties in the transaction. I mean, Duke's a great company, but are they really interested in the ratepayer's best interests in this transaction, or do they want to get their money and move on to something else? Now, probably both, but you know, they're split because they don't have the same need to satisfy the ratepayers that you and Joe Fischera would have. And then you look at the investment bankers, the underwriters, and it's way worse. You know, Duke would be a hero compared to them. I mean, they want to get as many transactions done in as much of a cookie cutter way as they possibly can. And I saw this at Exxon. I mean, they'd be coming in and offering me transactions that had nothing to do with what Exxon wanted or needed. And so when they see this transaction, you've got to take into consideration that these investment bankers have investor clients and they have issuing clients, and they're trying to balance to serve both of them. So they would like their investor clients to get good rates, you know, and then they also would like their issuing clients to, you know, get good rates on the downside, offer lower interest costs. But, you know, you can't exactly have it both ways. And I think you will see that the trend, and unfortunately, that what's been happening to securitization bonds has not been our friend recently. You know, there are ways to use techniques and keep pressure on the bankers. There are ways to bring down the spreads over treasuries, and Sabre has been able to do that in the past, and they can still do it. And some of them are technical. Some of them you get into the offering day and you sit there next to the bankers, and when they proudly say that we're 4 times oversubscribed, then you say, okay, well, now I guess the rate we're offering is too high. Let's go back and get 2 times oversubscribed and see how well the ratepayer can do. You know, that's one thing. The other thing is and this is the last thing I'll say, you know, in the actual offering material, you would like it as plain English as possible so it doesn't look very esoteric, because it really isn't all that esoteric. And you also want to make sure that you're not afraid of something like the SEC staff when they make a proclamation. I mean, when we were at Exxon, we would submit what we believed was right, expecting the SEC staff would come back to us and say, well, we don't necessarily agree. We can, that's what they're supposed to do because that's why they're the SEC staff, right? But that doesn't mean you take everything they say and cave into it. And that's exactly what's been happening lately. And that's why these governors who really do want to do well for the ratepayers, these governors are fighting to get asset-backed securities unrelated from securitizations and get securitizations back where they belong, closer to AAA corporates, because these are excellent high-class securities with the state guarantee and the commitments. You know, this is a fantastic security. And so this is my last thing. I think we all have to work, and you will be doing that as hard as possible to make sure your ratepayer gets the best possible deal.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers, gentlemen.
I don't know, Ed Fitzgerald, who has joined, you haven't met before, I would like to just ask, since he was an investor, might give just a few moments of conversation about, that you were on the buy side enjoying some of those juicy yields, but also willing to negotiate when we wanted to get on top of Treasury corporates. Maybe just a couple minutes of your perspective. He's joining our team as more depth for these types of certifications.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, you know, historically we've seen utility recovery bonds trade in a very wide range as compared to AAA rated corporate bonds. And, you know, I highlight the range there because, you know, it can be as tight as 10 to 20 basis points and as wide as, you know, 75 to 100. Some of that may be due to market conditions at a particular time. Others may be due to the size or the, you know, first time nature of an issuer coming to market, which I would say, and I think the Sabre team would agree, if a deal price is very wide as a first time issuer, that the bank probably could have done a better job explaining the strengths of the program and the benefits of investing, you know, benefits to the ratepayers and the strength of the bonds to the investor base so they can drive tighter pricing. To go to a point that Brian made, you know, in many instances, dealers will get transactions well oversubscribed, but won't tighten spreads dramatically thereafter. Maybe they'll come in 5 or 10 basis points, they'll get a few players to drop, maybe not, and then they'll allocate. You know, in some instances, we've seen where an issuer takes a hard line and they say, well, you're 12 times oversubscribed. Tighten the pricing 25 basis points. Tighten it more. Let's see what happens. Who drops out? In those cases, you may find that there's substantial savings still left on the table in the normal syndication process that occurs. So that's something worth, you know, thinking about how the commission would like the underwriters to approach marketing. As was mentioned before, they do have clients on both sides, and you want the clients, you know, to evaluate the transaction and participate in it. So, you know, there's a balancing act that dealers have to walk between getting the absolute lowest price and also ensuring that their investor-based clients are rewarded for the time and effort that they put in the ability to purchase some securities. And that's the fulcrum, I think, that a lot of players in the market, you know, maybe don't use to their advantage as much as they possibly could. And what I mean by that is citing the case where an issuer came in and significantly tightened the pricing and had numerous parties drop. You know, in my experience, you know, there are times when these bonds are traded very cheaply and are just, you know, really attractive instruments. And, you know, parties come out of the woodwork to participate in them and they don't get priced out of the deal. Other times when transactions tighten dramatically, you may see people drop. So don't underestimate the impact of the syndication process, the involvement of the treasurers of the corporations and or lead parties here to drive that pricing in to meet your standards of getting the lowest price possible for your consumer base. One last comment on the securities. The securities, they are not that complicated. People make them sound complicated, but they're really not. And they have a tremendous track record in terms of performance relative to other securities. And further, they have a reliance on the ongoing production and distribution and consumption of electricity in the ratepayer base, right? Or the geographic locale where the receivables, in essence, are being securitized, right? Or the future payment flows are being securitized. So I think that also that does point out that there is more of a corporate, involvement here than you might find in a typical securitization where someone originates automobile loans, packages to get them together, and sells them. Once those loans are sold to the marketplace, then the performance is based on collecting and distributing payments. That's very different than a ratepayer obligation or a recovery bond, where the corporation is still has to either procure or generate the electricity and move it there. And this also for a very long period of time. So the mechanisms built into the securities, most, especially the true up, really provide a strong foundation for the securities and have led to their great track record and performance. But the reason I bring up the corporate bonds is it is a larger market, and getting utility players, people that buy utility corporate bonds into the book could be a positive, because these bonds will look cheap to many other things in the very highly rated, high-grade corporate bond market. So I'll stop there. I'll answer any questions if anybody has them, but otherwise, I'll turn it back to Joe.
One of the things in that news article talked about the investors being extremely concentrated. We have data that will show you that the top 10 of this higher market, 10 investors own almost 30% of all the outstanding bonds. That is extremely concentrated. So so they have a lot of pricing power. So when you've heard comments like, say, well, we know who's been participating and who hasn't and will last. Well, if you're selling to the same usual suspects, you're probably going to get the same usual price. What you need to do is expand the market, do more work. I can tell you as an investment banker, when I was there, it was like, let's move it along. Let's move it along. Having to make 10 calls for $5 million orders to get $50 million versus one call for a $50 million order, we'd much rather do the one call. The one call for $50 million order, he's at 505. Maybe I can get those other people who are buy and hold, who are more safety oriented, people who will be willing to accept lower yields for the safety. Other people, they're trying to get as much juice, what we call juice, yield as possible. And when you see the reports, fatter return, outsized, what do you think that means? I mean, it means that it's more than what really it ought to be. And our job is to work through inform you about first working and set up a structure in the pre-issuance review. Make sure the financing order is not restrictive to look at things. Because, for example, I did notice in one of the settlement, there was a sentence where Duke said, the QITP will be able to attend any meeting that the company makes to investors. And it was kind of, well, you kind of want to be where when the underwriter is making presentations to investors. I like to see that. And I normally did get to see that, be invited and participate. We can show you actually some film clips of where we did and had participation. We also, in Florida, we had a roadshow where we actually met with investors, with members of the commission staff. So you sort of look at that and it's like, well, okay, you may not be making all the presentations. All those other ones are being done by the underwriters. We don't know what's really being said. So we want to know what's being said, how it's being positioned, and get into that and create. I think someone called it creative tension or something like that. But that's where you have to, as President Reagan said, quoting a Russian proverb: "Trust but verified. Cut the cards, deal the deck, and be honest with what you see." And that's what we hold ourselves to. We're honest with what we'll see. We'll communicate it to you, and you can make the decision. You give it with our recommendation or ask us questions in public. And we're happy to be, we've given testimony on this in multiple jurisdictions. None of our testimony, I think, has ever survived cross. I don't think anybody has been able to impugn any of the data that we have. Maybe, I'm pretty sure my memory hasn't failed me on that. But I think that gives you the comfort that you need. And not just this transaction, because there's going to be more down the road. And it's probably, the industry needs so much capital that this is going to go beyond storm recovery bonds. This is going to start, I mean, AEP already has done for rate base in West Virginia, and there's other talk about using this. And that's why we got to make sure that the right precedents are set, because it's harder to overcome bad precedents. It's not impossible. We did it in Texas, and we did it in West Virginia and in Florida in 2016. But it's better if we think ahead, make sure we get the right precedents, the right basis, and we have a team here beyond me, and I appreciate my comments from my colleagues, but it really is a team effort. And you think you've seen that in our previous assignment, our detail, our thoroughness, that's what we bring. And we're willing to do it in writing, in the open, and really would be honored to have this opportunity to serve.
Thank you very much. Any further commissioner questions? Hearing none, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here, particularly being here in person, and thank you for your team that's here virtually, and hope you have safe travels back. We're going to make a decision, hopefully within a couple of weeks, and certainly everyone will know. Thank you very much.
And if there's any other written questions, we'll be happy to respond. Thanks.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.